Learning to sew is hard enough. Learning to refashion or upcycle, or garment renovation as we like to say around here, learning to refashion clothes is even harder because you can only use what you've got, right? You're constrained by what is already in the clothing that you're trying to refashion. So I want to take you through my entire process from inspiration, how I interpret this inspiration into an actual refashion, and then the design development that I have gone through in this real life example of this refashion that I've done, the 3 different versions that it took me to get to the final end product. Hopefully you can look at all of this and get some really good ideas and see how it's done, so you can implement this this sort of design process, this design development, implement this into your own sewing so that you can get better and better each time that you make up your new sewing projects. Welcome back, my lovely ladies and gents. It is always a pleasure to see your smiling faces here, and well, I know you're smiling back at me because you tell me. Today's topic is about how do I come up with my refashion design ideas. As I teach refashion workshops, both in person and online, this question inevitably gets asked to me a lot, and was recently asked in whenever I do Instagram polls about content, which I just recently did. It always gets asked about how do I come up with refashion design ideas in particular, because let's face it, refashioning, upcycling, it's different. You can't just design at will. You can't just decide what you want to make and make it like you do when you're from scratch. You're constrained by the design features and elements that are within the garments that you find, because we're using ready-made garments and then refashioning them into something else. So you've always got a lot more constraints on your design and functionality that you need to contend with. And often it forces us to be a lot more creative, and we really have to think outside the box a lot when refashioning, upcycling, to get the design ideas and develop it along the way. When I thought best how to answer this question, I knew that using this refashion of mine behind me here would be probably the best one, because it, one, actually I have gotten so many questions about this top being in the background of my set here, asking me where it is, where you can get it, etc. It is a workshop that I have recently just released into Vintage Sewing School. So I think the design process for this one, the inspiration, is quite clear, and you can really clearly see how I've interpreted my inspiration, which I'll show you of course, into the refashion design. And then the second part of this is the design development. So the first one isn't the best one. I have made 3 different versions of this particular refashion until I got to the end one that was perfect and what I was happy with. So there's 2 elements to this video, in that it is about the inspiration and taking that inspiration and working through it, developing it through in different versions to get to your final one. And I actually think that this is one area where beginner sewers make big mistakes, in that quite often I see new sewers just make up a project, first time make it up, it doesn't turn out how they want exactly, and are quite unhappy with it, and they just throw it into the side and move on to another project and just keep repeating the same process of never being quite happy with anything, and just keep moving from different project to different project without ever sort of achieving and perfecting any skills there, and always being disappointed. I think this is actually a bit of a mistake that new sewers don't realize. I always encourage my students to actually make the same thing multiple times to really get good at it, and you develop your skills and the design as you go along. And so of course then you can use this and implement this idea into your own sewing to really up-level your own projects. As a little treat, I'm actually going to show you at the end a version from Rosemary, one of my students, who actually even was inspired and developed this design even further to make her own sleeved version of this one as well. So we'll get to that at the end. First of all, let's go back and let me explain where it all started with the inspiration for this piece. Now, I do not know which one of these I saw first, but basically the inspiration for this refashion came from two images I saw of a similar sort of wrap style top. One from the teens, an Edwardian style wraparound blouse, a bodice cover back then, and then another version in the 1950s, very similar in the way that it's all constructed in a wrap top. So I think I saw the 50s one first. It's basically a rectangle with a neck hole in it with ties either side that wrap around. So I saw that and had, like, I think years ago, and had sort of always thought that that would make a great little top. How cute. And then I think it was when I saw the Edwardian one, looking on Pinterest of course, that it really started to ring some bells, because I was more, I guess, drawn to this one with a bit of lace and the styling of it. So this one had a square neckline. It had some gathers up through the bodice down here and wrapped around, and it buttoned down, I think. But it's a similar idea, similar design. And I think when I saw that one, I really started to think, I could make this into a refashion, because basically if you cut off the, you know, think of men's shirt, if you cut off the collar, you're left with a little round hole. And then if you actually cut open the sleeves and the side seams entirely and lay it flat, you've basically got this shape that starts with these two wraparound tops. It just requires then some obviously tweaking, fitting, finishings, working it through in the design to get to the end product. But that's where it really came from. I knew I could create that shape from a men's shirt. And so then I set about doing my first prototype where I set to work and then tried actually turning this into a refashion. So I cut it all open first, and then I started pinning and tweaking. And let me get that first one and show you. And just like magic, my very first version. So this one, let me just show you how this actually operates. Because I needed to first get the functionality, and so it ties up with little ties at the back and at the front. These are separate pieces that have been cut out from different parts of the shirt, and this doesn't quite fit my mannequin as well as it does my body. This is a bit shorter, so on this one I just used a really not so great lace edge for this one. I was really treating this kind of like a toile, really, a mock-up, just to see how it would actually work, because it was the first time I was ever doing it. I didn't know how it was going to work, if it would turn out any good, if it was just going to be a practice one for the next one to be something that I could wear. I wasn't sure. And so it did require quite a lot of fitting, pinning, tweaking, and those of you that are in vintage sewing school and know this refashion, you know it is quite, it's a bit more challenging, because it does take quite a lot to get the fit right, and I had to, on this one, work out the straps quite a bit. So when I first made these straps, I just did them straight, like as in straight rectangular pieces. But I found that when it came down under my bust here, it just did not look right, because it was just like this big chunk. It needed to be curved under. And so that's something that definitely took a few variations on this particular one to get the straps in a nice shape for this one. And I actually used the collar as a little waistband here on this as well, because I created the gathers just like in that Edwardian one that I saw. But as I said, this one requires a lot of fitting and tweaking, and this one, it's pretty good. But after wearing it for a while, I did discover that it is still a little bit too big for me, a bit long, and so it blouses a bit more than I like, because this design is cropped, so it always is just going to ride up to that natural spot, and it's oftentimes then when you wear it, you find that it might be a bit too big, too long, too short, and those types of things only come out when you really wear it. And so I was quite happy with this one, and then I wanted to make a second version a little while later, which leads us on to version 2. I made this one a little bit differently. I really wanted to play around with some of those design elements and features and see if it made a difference to the fit, to the look of it, to the feel of it, and just the general construction process. So what did I do differently for this one? You might notice straight away that this looks like a nice tighter fit through the length, and you are correct. I did make this one a little bit shorter. So the next version in doing this was infinitely easier because I had the first one as a template already. I could literally lay this one, like lay my first one flat, get the length from, you know, from here all the way around to through here, and just make it a little bit shorter at the front or the back, wherever needed, or both. And it made it so much easier to actually get those types of tweaks made for the second version. So that made a big difference. I did a few different versions on this one because I took this to an actual in-person workshop and we were doing different sewing skill techniques. So I had lace around the collar. I used a slightly nicer lace. Still, I might use something a little bit different next time, but I think it works nicely and I like lace. I can't wait to do a different version of this again, but that's another story. I used a bias tape as a facing. I used a bias facing for the armhole edges here. I think it gives a beautiful finish. Bias facings are one of my most favorite finishing techniques that there are, and I also taught that in the workshop. That looks quite a bit different. And the other really big thing that is different is I changed this front design. So it was quite tricky to use the collar and make that all fit and gather into the bodice. And so I thought I might try something a little simpler that might work for the workshop to kind of cut down the time it takes to make it. And so with this one, I just hemmed this one with a nice big sort of thick hem, so it's folded up twice, and just did some tucks along here because obviously you can't really gather that in the same, so I did 2 little tucks here. Now I think this looks really neat and tidy. It looks very sharp and crisp, I should say, I think, and suits, definitely looks really nice. But in wearing this one, it is just not as nice, at least to me, and it was commented from others as well, that this one, it didn't seem as nice. It really comes to life when you have that waistband, that thick waistband there. It really holds the top down and gives the front tie up something to really actually come over, and it all works really nicely together. And this is where things like, although it might look nice on the mannequin, in real life and really wearing it, it's a different story. And that's where I knew that I needed to go back to the waistband method and really tailor that to fit more nicely. So from this one, I know that I got the length right, the fit was good. It's also playing around with different sized shirts. So that's where the shoulder seam might come up here on one, it might come down here on one. And on this particular REFASHIon makes a big difference on how it all comes under the arms. You'll see in, let's move on to the next version, which brings us back to version number 3. This is the one that I really developed and actually did step by step in my online workshops. So this is where I really even tweaked the strap pattern pieces. So really perfecting these. Obviously these are available inside the workshop, the templates for these. Getting that curve that I talked about under the bust, you can probably see that better now. And the whole process of this one really came together so much nicer and really smoothly because I had 2 different versions before this in which to get the right length that I liked from the bodice length. This one is perfect on me. Now remember, it doesn't fit my mannequin anywhere near as good as it actually fits my body. The finishes on this one are beautiful because I knew sort of what worked, what I liked. I did a piping finish on this one because piping was actually another lesson, another skill that I was doing lessons for whilst I did this REFASHIon. So that's also part of why choosing piping for this one, but it gives a nice, neat, crisp finish and I think it suits the design really well. 2 little button features down here, adding 2 instead of just the 1, I think works beautifully. I obviously went back to using the collar here because it is what works best. And then something else that I did, of course I played around with slightly different neckline shapes, so a little bit higher, a little bit lower, to what basically is just a preference, and I show in the workshops how to make that different. So one thing I did do differently on this one is I experimented with fitting this one in with a little pleat at the back here. So this is too long for her. There we go. When this fits nicely, I think it looks quite nice. It gives a bit more room for movement. But of course, you know, it's optional, but I don't think that I will include that one myself next time. I think I will leave that out and just make it a straight back. Now, if you're looking at all three of these and you're thinking, I can't really see a difference. I mean, you can see the different like lace versus piping and the waistband, but other than that, you can't sort of really notice an overall difference. Don't worry, because noticing these little things like this is something that as you get better and better, you start to really notice. For me, I can tell instantly that that first one was my very first one, and I was just muddling my way through it. It's not as neatly finished in things because I was experimenting as I went. I'm making it up as I go along. I'm creating it. So of course it's not going to be perfect. And the fit is still needing to be tweaked. Again, it's the first time I'm doing it, so it needs to be tweaked and worked on. And each version, I can tell instantly looking at them. You might be able to too, the more experienced sewers here will be able to pick those along. The beginners, maybe you don't see it right now, but it's something to know that you will see. As you get better and better, you'll notice these things in your own projects too. That each time you do the same thing, you get better and better, and really make that your end perfect one only comes out through many different iterations. And one of my students, Rosemary, actually has been inspired the same way as I did from this original one, and has developed this design even further. And to be honest, I kind of want to make her version in this one. So Rosemary wanted to put sleeves on this. She didn't really like it sleeveless, and she sort of then had the problem, how do I put sleeves on this design? And so she searched Pinterest, just as I do, for inspiration, and she came across this 1930s jiffy style top. Basically, it's the same thing, this same rectangle with a hole in it with tie-up front and back underneath. But this one had sort of like half circles on the sides that then formed fluttery sleeves a la very 1930s style. And so she instantly sort of saw the shape and knew that she could put half circle shapes onto her blouse to kind of create that. So she worked through it, and she took a lot of time in thinking how she would do the finishes, how she would create the circles, the size of the circles, working on the proportion. She tweaked all those things and then found a way to add her semicircle pieces to the sleeves, and it created the most beautiful fluttery sleeve blouse. And to be honest, I kind of like it even better than the sleeveless version. So I really want to do that with mine. So there's plenty of fabric left over for that. I think I'm going to add it as an upgrade or another variation to this refashion that you can do, because that's half the fun. It's the different variations you can do to your own refashions, and each time you do the same thing, but you can add and tweak it a little bit different here and there, and then you get a whole new blouses, whole new dresses, whole new designs from that same thing by just developing it a little further every time, and it gets even more perfect each time as you go. And trust me, the more that you do this, the easier it is by far. You learn, it's something that you learn and develop how to do. It's like your design muscles just need to be developed. Doing different variations of the same base style is a way to get really good, because you can get really good at making that refashion, making that garment, and just making a few little changes on it creates an entirely different garment. I've made other videos like this one here where I refashioned the same simple ladies blouse refashion, but did it in two different sort of ways, and I've got two different completely looks, like tops from that. So always think about how you can just decorate differently or make little tweaks to make it two entirely different items, but you've learnt that one skill, that one project, and gotten really good at doing that one. There are links to that video and where you can get access to this refashion down below in the description box, so check there for the details. So I really want to know, what are your biggest tips that you use or have for others and me in the design process? Like, how do you get your inspiration? How do you develop your designs into actual garments? I'd love to hear them. Leave me a comment below in the comments box, and I always love reading them so much, but unfortunately I cannot reply to all of them. So we are a community all learning from each other here, and I really, really love to see and appreciate when you all like and comment on each other's comments, because I can't get to all of them. It really does help me out, so I thank you for that. It's how we all learn together. It lets everybody know that all the tips that you share with each other are helping others as well. And that's what we're all about. All the links are in the description box below. And until next time, happy sewing. Bye.